Ricky wasn't the only one making a confession. In addition to the assorted retellings Jimmy shared with his lawyer, he also made 2 official statements. And true to form, they contradicted each other. To anyone who knew anything about drugs, that wasn't so surprising. After all, there was one thing everyone agreed upon. Before the murder, the boys were high on an enormous quantity of LSD and angel dust. Dangerous drugs on their own. Taken together, they're a recipe for disaster. Nerve cells in the brain which normally talk to each other through a series of electrochemical impulses are interrupted, altering a person's sense of reality.
LSD is a synthetic drug which produces hallucinations as its primary effect. It also does produce psychic effects, such as altered sense of oneself, such as feelings of strangeness, or what we call derealization.
If you're in a bad mood, of course, it would just exacerbate your bad mood. It could make you more tense, more violent, more to act on what you're fantasizing about, whether it's punching somebody, killing somebody, or just generally being aggressive.
Larger doses would only magnify the effect.
That night, between all of us, we did 30, 40 hits. We done 10 hits apiece, and we smoked, 17 bags of angel dust between the 3 of us. We were high.
Under those circumstances, Jimmy's recollections were bound to be garbled, confused, and contradictory. His first statement said he was only an innocent bystander, but in the second, he admitted holding Gary down while Ricky plunged his knife repeatedly into his victim. Knife markings on the body were consistent with an immobilized victim, but Gary could have been unconscious with no need to hold him down. But we'll never really know. At his trial, Jimmy Troiano exercised his rights as a defendant and chose not to take the stand. Had he testified, his conflicting statements, shifting story, and history of drug use may have worked against him. But his lawyer turned these liabilities into assets. Jimmy was just too far gone to know what he was talking about. Jimmy Troiano walked. But perhaps the most surprising and troubling thing about the murder was the casual attitude of their friends. As many as a dozen of them trekked through the woods to look at Gary's body. Here, at last, was something even better than music videos.
They were inside on something very serious, intense. These kids were very bored. They were looking for something, and this was, as it was true, there was a body there. This was real excitement. And as the word spread, nobody really wanted it to go to the police or be the one who went to the police when this was such an inside thing.
Physically, it was the worst crime I've ever seen. The fact that young children, if you will, teenagers, took the life of another, brutally, not just quickly, brutally tortured. And after the body is dead, left it there to rot and to be attacked by nature, animals, and the weather. The fact that they had to be told by visitors to the gravesite that they should have the courtesy to cover the body up. There's no feelings with these people. These people are animals themselves.
It seemed like such an idyllic setting. A seaside community where parents came to raise kids in prosperity and safety. So what went wrong? Was Northport an isolated incident, or was this only the beginning of something even bigger? The town of Northport is hardly the kind of place that springs to mind when you think of horrible crimes. The middle and upper-class family community of around 8,000 people had only 5 reported homicides in its entire history. Safety was always part of its appeal.
This is Northport. It's a beautiful little seaside village on Long Island, about an hour and a half outside of New York City, and a million miles away from their problems. Or, so we thought.
In this bedroom community of New York, parents would leave for the city each morning, letting their children fend for themselves, believing they were safe from corrupting influences.
Ricky Kasso grew up in what would seem to be the prototypically ideal American suburban home. His father was a teacher at a local school. He was also a football coach. His mother was very concerned, and he lived in very much a supportive type of community with good schools, everything that a kid could desire. And I guess the whole tragedy was compounded by this gnawing question about how could something so bad happen from something so seemingly good.
Many of the kids didn't find it so good. They didn't care for big houses or big jobs. They were searching for something else. They needed some excitement.
It was very much what we would picture suburbia to be. A lot of middle to upper class white kids hanging out, looking for something to do. Basically bored with school, bored with their life, frustrated with their parents. Pretty much the same issues any teenager would have.
If kids were getting into trouble, many parents weren't around to know about it.
Yeah, it just seemed that a lot of times kids were left and they'd come home from school and there wouldn't be anybody there.
Kids were left to experiment on their own. A drug culture evolved in Northport's junior high school.
The drugs really represented what was the excitement, the real sport, what was going on at the time. School was not cool, sports were not cool, academic clubs weren't very cool at all. But taking drugs and taking these trips and getting wasted was pretty much the mark of achievement at the time.
In this respect, Ricky Kasso was an overachiever. But when drugs weren't enough, he chose Satan. When Satan wasn't enough, he chose murder. And even Jimmy Troiano, who was there that night, doesn't really know why it happened.